Hello, welcome back. In this video, we're going to learn arrays. Arrays are basically a list of values as opposed to storing a single value in a variable. Arrays basically let you store a list of values so you can easily access them through a single name. Let's go ahead and create a new class in the existing package. We will name it arrays and create our main method. We'll delete this, and so far we've seen something like this, right? Create a new number integer variable and assign the value 20 to it. Now, what if we want to store a list of values? Let's say numbers 1 through 7, right? But we don't want to create number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 individual variables to store them, but want to use a single variable to access all of them. That's where basically arrays come in. There are multiple ways to create arrays. We're going to see the first type now, int numbers, right? Now we want to make this an array. To make this an array, you just need to type open and close square brackets right after the type and say equals. We wanted to store numbers 1 through 7. All you need to do is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Close curly brace, semicolon. So what we have done here is create a numbers array of integers, and we're storing numbers 1 through 7 in that array. Right? How would we go about accessing these values? Let's try to print the fourth item in the array, right? So if we want to display number 4, let's say system.out.println, say fourth item in numbers is, you would type numbers, and then we have to tell what position, right? We want this number displayed, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's try to give 4 and see what happens, right? So we had numbers, open square bracket, number 4, close square bracket. Save it. Let's try to run this guy. Run as Java application. We have fourth item in numbers is 5, but we have the number 4 as the fourth item. What happened here? This is a very critical thing to remember. Arrays always start from 0, right? The position of arrays, or the index as it's called sometimes, of arrays always start with 0, right? So which means number 1 here is actually the 0th position of array. 2 would be the first position, 3 would be the second position, 4 would be the third, and 5 would be the fourth, right? So when we say display the fourth position value of numbers, we got number 5 displayed. Now if we wanted number 4, what we should have given here is 0, 1, 2, 3, numbers of 3. Change the numbers of 3, print. Now you got 4, right? Now if you say numbers of 0 and run it again, you would get number 1. Well, this should be the first item. But anyway, I wanted to show the difference. So the first position is always 0 in an array. It's very critical to remember that. Now, arrays are not just limited to integers. Even floating points can be made an array. Objects can be arrays, as we will see later in the course. Let's try to create a floating point now, array, right? And we call it salaries. Now, I mentioned earlier there are multiple ways to create arrays. We saw one way, right? Now, the other way is to just create the array first and then do the initialization later, that is, supply values later. Now, to do that, you would do new. This is something we have not seen before. We'll talk about new later, but just type new, just type float. Again, open square bracket. Let's give number 3, right? What we are saying is create a salaries array, and that array is going to have 3 items in total. So when we say 3 items in total, It's zeroth position, first position, and second position. That's it, right? So 3 is the size. We have not supplied any value yet, but let's try to print out that println of float 0, right? Not float 0, sorry, salary 0. So we're saying display whatever is in the 0th position of salaries, right? Let's try to run it. We have 0, right? This is another critical thing to remember. When we initialized variables earlier, we saw that if you don't initialize the variable, so when we declare variable, if you don't initialize them and we try to use them later in the program, we got an error, right? But that's not the case for arrays. Arrays are initialized automatically, right? If it's an integer, it's going to be 0. If it's a floating point, it's going to be 0, 0.0, right? So arrays are initialized automatically. This is another critical thing to remember. Now we can say salaries of 0 equals 5000.12, and since all the floating point numbers are double by default, we have to change it to a floating point before we save it into a floating point variable. Now if you run it, so we have 5000.12. So using this position, you can either display like we did here or even assign values, right? So this is the second type of creating an array and initializing the values later. One more critical thing to remember before we move on to the next video is we can never go out of the bounds of an array, right? For example, we said salaries can hold only three values, right? 0, 1, 2. Now let's see what happens if you do system.out.println salaries of 5, right? We're asking for whatever is in the fifth position to be displayed. Let's try to run it. We got 5000.12 displayed, but then we have exception in thread main array index out of bounds number 5, right? We're going to look in detail about exceptions in later chapter, but just remember that exceptions are bad. If something like that happens in your program, it almost always means that something went wrong. What went wrong here is we have told Java that salaries can hold only three values at 0, 1, 2 position, but we asked it to display the fifth position value, which doesn't exist. So we have an array index out of bounds exception, and it even gives you the value that you supplied, right? So it's very important to remember that we can never go out of bounds of an array. We can declare like this and use only the three positions, or we can declare like this where the seven positions are created automatically and the values are assigned, but you can never go out of the bounds of the size that you specified. So I would really like to encourage you to try arrays with other types that we have, like byte, short, char, and see what you get. Arrays are very important because that's arrays are one of the very common things used in Java programming. So it's really important that you understand arrays better before you proceed. That's basically it. Thank you so much.